Okay, I think we will make a start. We've got a lot of ground to cover, big topic in 1 hour. I say that as someone who's been researching different aspects of unrestricted funding for over 20 years. So I'm interested to see what we can distill down into 1 hour. Welcome, everyone. I'm Ben Cairns. I'm from IVAR. And absolutely delighted to have two colleagues and friends of IVAR with me today. Would you like to introduce yourselves? If I go to you first, Rachel.
Hi, I'm Rachel. I'm the director of the Peter Minette Trust, and I'll share a bit more about who we are in a minute. Thank you.
Great to have you with us, Rachel. And Louise.
Hi everyone, I'm Louise Snelders. I'm Head of Funding and Partnerships for Co-op Foundation.
Great to have you with us, and particular thanks to Co-op who've enabled us to share the learning through this report from a related project we're doing, and we're hugely grateful to you for that. So we have apologies from our third speaker, Amy Breyer from Pears Foundation, who is unwell and who so happens we are a grantee of Pears Foundation. So I will describe very briefly their approach at towards the end of our presentation. The format is I'm going to set the scene briefly in a moment and talk about the work that we've captured in the Shared Endeavour report. I'm then going to hand on to Louise, who is going to talk about Co-op's approach and thinking about this question. And then we'll hear from Rachel. And then we'll conclude with some brief comments from me about the Pears approach. And then hopefully that will give us around 25 minutes for Q&A. Please use the chat, comments, resources, ideas, provocations, and we'll see where we can get to. This is an ongoing conversation, but let's try and capture as much of that as we can today. So I am going to share my screen and get some slides going, and we will. Good. I hope you can see that, Rachel. You're the only person I can see, so you can put a thumbs up if you can see that. Okay, so this is what we're talking about. Approaches to assessing the impact of unrestricted funding. And the context for this conversation is the Open and Trusting Grant Making Initiative convened by IVAR and now a community of around 145 trusts and foundations across the UK. And for those of you who are not familiar with that work, and if you are interested and aren't yet a member of the community, we will love you to join and email me afterwards if you're interested. But this came out of the explosion of flexible and trusting approaches to grant making during COVID. And it is an approach that, as the slide says, is characterized by patience, empathy, and kindness. So this is a collaborative movement for change. And it is one that really tries to put mutuality at the heart of funding relationships. And we're going to see some of that reflected in the approaches that Louise and Rachel describe shortly. The 8 commitments that you sign up to join the Open and Trusting Grant Making community is set out on this slide, and they cover the arc of the funding experience from pre-application through to application itself, decision making, the type of funding awarded, and reporting. And why this matters is set out on this slide, and this comes from our 2022 funding experience survey completed by over 1,200 charities from across all 4 nations of the UK. And they told us that open and trusting matters for these 5 reasons. It enables charities to be more responsive, to be more agile, to be more focused, to learn and share openly and plan more confidently. And when we think about the pressure that most of your grantees are under at the moment, and when we think about what it takes for charities to do their best work, I think this is what we should be striving for. that this is what charities can tell us about what funding enables them to do. And so a key question, and this comes right to the heart of the debate about assessing the impact of unrestricted funding, is what does it take for the work of charities to go well? And that requires us to really interrogate the purpose of each condition that we place on funding and each expectation that we place on funding, and ask ourselves, is that in the best interest of the charity and the work it's trying to do? And we're looking at the impact of unrestricted funding in the context of Commitment 6 of Open and Trusting Grant Making, which is enable flexibility. And as you'll see, and for those of you who aren't members of the community, this is not an unrestricted funding or bust group. The commitment is to give unrestricted funding, but if you can't, to make funding as flexible as possible. And some of you will have been involved in parallel discussions that we're leading around multi-year funding as an exemplar of flexibility. The background is, not surprisingly, that charities give huge weight to the importance of unrestricted funding. As we heard in the Funding Experience Survey, unrestricted funding, described by charities as money that we can spend on anything within our charitable object, so real freedom in there, it makes a huge difference to charities' ability to respond to changing circumstances and things that matter most. And that is what we're striving for here. But we also know that restricted grants are the norm for many, and that part of the reason that some funders struggle with making the transition from restricted to unrestricted is this question of understanding impact. And that's why it's going to be really important that we listen to Louise and Rachel's stories of how that concern has been addressed in the design of their approaches. Because we also know that surviving on a diet of restricted project funding is not in the best interest of the work. Whereas unrestricted funding, to quote from charities that we work with, means that we achieve more, help more people, and make more of a difference. And that, I would suggest, is the shared priority of both funders and funded organisations. So our research involved a review of academic and grey literature, and then qualitative field work on the impact practices of 9 charitable trusts and foundations, 5 of whom are included as named case examples in the report. And as I said earlier, huge thanks to Co-op Foundation, who commissioned the bigger piece of research, but have given IVAR permission to share the learning with the funding community. And before I hand on to Louise, just a quick whistle stop of key findings. The first key point to make is that far from giving up on impact, as some armchair critics of open and trusting grant making and trust-based philanthropy would have you believe, funders who make unrestricted grants are thinking very seriously about impact. But what they're thinking about is, what does it look like and whose job is it to define, monitor, and assess it? And they are trying to situate their impact practice in the context of strategic purpose, values, and priorities. So there is direct alignment there, which is, I think, critical. They are respecting and often privileging the knowledge of charities as experts in their work. And the 5 approaches do share some common features. So although there is no simple or right answer to the question, what does impact look like and how do we assess it? What we can see across these different approaches is firstly, a real commitment to testing the realism of your aspirations around impact against the size of grants. So to be proportionate there, but to also to be mindful and respectful of the competing priorities for the time and capacity of both funding organisations and yourselves. So not to overburden your own system or grantees with disproportionate requirements and expectations. Secondly, hugely important is to resist the pressure to prove the precise impact of your money. That is not a necessary element of actually demonstrating responsible stewardship. or making informed judgments about your contribution to positive social change. Contribution, not attribution, is key here. And finally, this key idea of championing impact as a collective achievement, hence the title of the report, Shared Endeavour. And so finally, for me, this provisional framework we've developed for assessing the impact of unrestricted funding describes 5 distinct but related, as Rachel will illustrate, distinct but related approaches to assessing the impact of unrestricted funding, each of which we have organized around a key learning question, and more detail of that is set out in the report. So I am going to stop there. Thank you for listening. And I'm going to hand over to Louise to talk to us about the Co-op Foundation and their approach. Thank you, Louise.
Thanks, Ben. This is where I hold my breath to see whether I'm able to share my screen. Bear with me, everyone, please. Hopefully you can all see that. You know who I am already, but I'm really delighted to be here today. And I'm really keen to talk about Co-op Foundation's approach to unrestricted funding. I will caveat what I'm going to talk about by the fact that our experience is really still deepening, we're still learning. So we are not coming here to talk today as the experts in any way at all. So just to kind of manage expectations. I wanted to start at the beginning in terms of why we give unrestricted funding, and there are a number of reasons, but when we first began this process, we looked at developing our strategy and linked that to what Co-op's vision was at the time, which was cooperating for a fairer world. So that for us was a really important starting point for the creation of our new strategy, which is called Building Communities of the Future Together. And we launched that in October 2022. We had previously awarded some standalone grants that were unrestricted, but these were pretty reasonably limited in scope, and we had a very supportive board of trustees in terms of the concept of unrestricted funding. But we recognised that actually it was still difficult with these standalone grants to be able to establish how we might learn beyond, I suppose, what we would call anecdotally positive. So we set our stall out with a strategy in terms of moving towards much more progressive grant making, so what we're calling a cooperative way of funding. And that basically means being a relational funder, someone who values collaboration, who values the honesty and openness that Ben's talked about in terms of signing up to the flexible funder trusted commitments. And we really wanted to see it kind of make sense for us to have unrestricted funding as a central pillar of our strategy. So that was really important from the very beginning. But we also recognise that that's not the only factor in transforming our relationships with funded partners. So the importance of valuing flexibility and trust, and for us really turning our back to a certain extent on that sense of discomfort about holding the power, and really seeing this about being something that is focused on doing the right thing. So focusing on who are the experts, which is the organisations that we fund, to allow them and support them to use the funding in the right way for their organisation, rather than buying outcomes, which I suppose is the much more traditional way of funding. And what we then started to see is that that in turn means relationships begin from that point of a deeper sense of trust. They become stronger, they become much more meaningful. And we have already started to see that happen with our Future Communities Fund. So that's the first strategic fund that we launched back at the end of 2022, sorry, losing track, I've lost a whole year. Hopefully you can read the circles okay on this slide. So moving on to talk about what does impact mean to us. So obviously there are many ways to look at the impact of unrestricted funding. And thinking about you all as the audience, I am choosing to talk about this at a level that I hope will really start to speak to some of your boards of trustees, leadership teams. So thinking about this through quite a tangible lens in terms of how you might deliver. And also, just again to say, you know, I'm not a learning and evaluation expert, so this is about the kind of operational delivery side of things. So we are absolutely able to redefine the funding relationship with our partners and focus on learning. And that's about the work that partners are doing. They, as I said, they are the experts. And even that recognition, so talking about partners through that lens of them being the experts, and changing the dynamic that we have with funded partners can be quite transformational in terms of the relationships when you set your stall out from the very beginning. We also focus on the fact that partner success is our strategic success. So because we support whole organizations with their mission, with their strategy, that helps us to contribute to positive change through all of their work. And also recognizing that success is sometimes the learning that comes about when things don't go to plan. So we're not saying that success is all, you know, unrealistic unicorns and rainbows. It really isn't. It's the learning that comes from whatever that journey is. And then the eternal bugbear for anybody who's been on the other side of the funding dynamic and has been seeking funding, there's no more shoehorning. So we, you know, have all probably experienced that kind of hamster wheel of servicing funder priorities and seeing that shift with every new funding application. And you can say to partners, you do it in your way and genuinely mean that. Also, more time and energy is focused on delivering an organization's mission than servicing our reporting needs. And, you know, let's be honest, a lot of these reports that are completed are either read and then filed somewhere electronically and never looked at again, or in some cases they're not even read, and you know that is sad, and we don't want to perpetuate that. We're also able to respond swiftly to what's happening with our partners. So we're not in a fortunate position where we've always got more money to offer, but what we can do is be really flexible. So, for example, having the ability to talk to partners about moving funding between financial years, where that's helpful to them. And it also means that in turn, partners can adapt to whatever is going on in the world. And we've seen that with the cost of living crisis, that flexibility can really mean that they can pivot whatever they're doing and offer whatever's needed to the organizations and the communities that they're supporting. There are also far fewer boundaries to our funding. So when we fund holistically, we view our support of an organization in terms of everything that they do. So whether that's supporting the campaigns that they're running, whether that's the projects that they're delivering that we are not necessarily funding directly, or innovative initiatives that we can, you know, provide support for and a platform for. And when you funded on an unrestricted basis, the opportunities for what your organization can showcase and amplify in terms of what partner organizations are delivering is not limited in any way. So you can write blogs about anything that that organization is doing. The sky's the limit. And we have certainly found that a really exciting opportunity in terms of working differently to showcase the work that partners are doing. Three, I suppose, really important aspects of what matters to us when assessing impact then. Our Future Communities Fund partners have said to us that unrestricted funding we awarded to them has stopped them scrabbling around. And that might seem like quite a small thing, but actually it is a very real impact for organizations who are, you know, facing really difficult times in terms of continuing their delivery. And it can't be underestimated. We have been able to provide just a small amount of security for those organizations. So of all of the organizations that we supported via the Future Communities Fund, they all have a turnover of under £250,000. So they're not grassroots organizations, but they are reasonably small scale. In terms of the learning from other funders, so we commissioned the piece of research about how other fundings were capturing the impact of unrestricted funding, and that demonstrates our commitment to learning from others, and actually that includes the learning from our partners as well. So bringing that into the mix and making sure that we listen and we learn from what we're being told and what we hear. We started our Future Communities Fund journey by having a set of learning questions that looked through 3 different lenses. So we looked as a funder, what that was going to mean for us, for our partners, and also for the young people who were going to be supported by the organisations that we're partnering with. I'm not going to bore you all by going into too much detail about that, but just to give you a little bit of a flavour, some of the questions that we've asked ourselves are around what perceptions, skills and behaviours needed to change at Co-op Foundation as a funder as we move into unrestricted funding and adopting participatory grant making as well, which has been quite an important part of our first strategic fund, and having young people actually make the decisions about those funds. And how can the foundation build stronger trusting relationships and partnerships with the funded organisations through unrestricted funding? And then for partners, how can the foundation build stronger trusting relationships and partnerships with funded organisations through unrestricted funding? So really important questions that we feel it's really important to kind of capture learning and information about. And in terms of the core elements of our approach, when we launched Future Communities Fund, we saw organisations that were delivering work that aligned with 2 of our strategic priorities. So supporting diverse young people into positions of power and leadership. I could probably talk for an hour actually about some of the lessons learned on that fund, but that is a whole other presentation. So keeping on topic, we worked with a collective of 10 young people, and they selected 13 incredible organisations who we're working with now and are delivering these priorities very differently to each other, but all of their work is aligned to our strategic priorities and is relevant to helping us achieve our strategic goals. And that is a really critical part of the success around the approach. We have also funded partners on the Future Communities Fund for up to 5 years. So we certainly felt that without longer term multi-year funding, we would continue to waste the time of organisations on this hamster wheel, and see them coming back to us year on year and having to kind of, demonstrate their worth. That to us does not lead to a deep and meaningful, honest, trusting relationship. So it was important to us that we were able to offer longer term funding. Being supportive and strengthening also means understanding that our team needs to use slightly different skills to support partners. So this is about nuanced differences, and genuinely feeling like you're continuing to add value to organizations and support partners. Sometimes, the unrestricted funding is what keeps an organization afloat. But we look, very much to support them in terms of things like signposting, in terms of, access to various other pieces of support that we can, and trying to support their growth. We also recognise that we need to know when we're best placed to support and when that support is best placed by others. So in our newer funds, the approach that we take is to commission a learning partner. And that's the role, obviously, that I've taken with our Future Communities Fund partners. So our progress reporting sits entirely separately and is quite adaptable based on what the needs of our partners are. So thinking about, their capacity, what other reports they're producing for other funders, and reusing and recycling information that's already being produced wherever that's possible. We also have a learning and support approach that focuses on creating safe spaces for partners. So we really encourage them to tell us what their learning ambitions are for our funds. So for the Future Communities Fund, we have a learning and evaluation framework which has been co-produced. We ask partners what they wanted to get out of that. There is not an imposed approach, but of course, we did share our ambitions for the fund as part of the framing for the session with partners. And then finally, we've made sure to encourage partners to spend time focusing in on what their challenges are. So this keeps us grounded in the real world. So there's not that separation between funder and organisations doing the work on the ground. Keeps our eyes open, and it makes sure that, you know, if there are ways in which we can support, that we've got a line of sight. And we're also very interested in whether there are any exciting or innovative ways in which partners are capturing learning. So we feel that, you know, the fundamental difference in approach is that we are working through our approach with partners and we're not imposing it on them. I did have a bit of a glitch with slides there, so I don't know if you actually managed to see my last slide, but back to you, Ben. Thanks, everyone.
Louise, thank you. If you stop sharing as well, that would be great. Thank you so much. Hugely interesting. I like the idea of moving away from unicorns and rainbows, something we might hold on to there, but really interesting to see this kind of whole system approach, which I think is going to be picked up now by you, Rachel.
Hi, thank you. And thank you, Louise, as well. I just wanted to thank Chris, Liz and Ben for this really valuable report. As a solo worker particularly, it's really valuable when someone else takes a look at what we're doing and analyzes it. And this new framework is incredibly helpful for us. Just to place us in that framework, we can see that we started out in organizational development, but that we've landed firmly now on funder performance. What I'll just do briefly is say a little bit about who we are and what our purpose is. We're a small place-based and independent funder in Lambeth and Southwark. We support small local charities embedded in their communities to strengthen those communities. And in 2020, as many of you know, we pivoted from distributing around 40 or 50 small micro grants a year to giving a smaller number of large unrestricted multi-year grants. And in 2022, in response to learning during COVID, we prioritised Black-led charities. So we're distributing around £250,000 a year that we now distribute to around 6 to 12 funded partners, depending on cycles. We've got an amazing board who are pictured here, and there's a real energy and passion for unrestricted and for equity. 6 out of 7 of our trustees have been appointed since we started on this journey, which is why it's very exciting, because we're looking at adapting all the time. So there are 7 trustees chaired by Tracy, who's bottom left, great friend of Ivar, and I'm the only employee working 4 days a week. So I wanted to add a caveat, and this is echoing really what Louise said, is it's very easy just to describe unrestricted, but for us and for our partners, and this is really what they've said, the impact of unrestricted isn't just unrestricted, it's these other things as well. So multi-year grants, at least 3 years, although we're now seeing that possibly isn't enough. So we need to think about that. Large grants, we give 30,000 a year to charities with incomes of less than 300,000 a year, and many are far less than that. Transparency about our processes, particularly about renewals, which we had to work on, but also about expectations at catch-up visits. The in-person visits for us are essential. That's how we develop trust and help address the power imbalance. Along with light touch monitoring, we write up everything ourselves, but also we constantly have to keep ourselves in check. It's very easy as trust develops for a funded partner to talk about real concerns, and it's very easy to find ourselves slipping into being a regulator. So we and the trust, well, I and the trustees keep ourselves in check all the time, but this is all underpinned by, you know, our real values approach and our respect that the funded partners are the experts, not us. So before looking at the value and how we look at impact, I really wanted to share the voice of one of our funded partners, from Felicia Boschrin, who's the CEO at Spring Community Hub in Southwark. In fact, I think, to be honest, this says it all, and I could probably stop after this, but anyway, this is on our website as well. When you get a call from our funder, you're usually panicking about what it is. It's a nicer place to be when you can share what you want and not worry how things look. Writing a new strategy might not be going well, or we might have a problem, but that's okay, it's less frightening. When funders turn up and listen, it makes a huge difference. It helps my confidence as CEO, but it's also human and gives confidence to my whole staff team. When funders were there to meet local councillors at the opening of our new social supermarket, it helps councillors to feel good about us, but also felt good that someone else cares for our local residents. Being able to use the money as we want means we shift to focusing on our recipients and their needs, not just pleasing the funder. Otherwise, the client loses out. Talking like this helps us get to the next level, and that's got to be better. So I was asked to look at the value to us, and basically we see the value of unrestricted in three broad ways. The firstly is it's far more effective, we find, in our funded partners. I mean, this has been said already, but really having the power to for the funded partners to make their own decisions about how to spend it without checking to us results in huge flexibility as well as essential time to focus on delivery and thinking. These are some things funded partners have told us. They've said real life involves things changing all the time. As Louise said, whether that's COVID or the cost of living, or in a very practical way, this is Issa in the photograph from a fantastic youth organisation in Lambeth called Bright Centres. Their roof started leaking and overnight their income halved. So just knowing that they didn't have to check with us how that money could be spent made a huge difference. But also news headlines and government rhetoric can really impact on an organisation's work the very next day, particularly around immigration. As Felicia said, the client comes first. They're not doing things just to please the funder, and they can try things out without being fearful. And, you know, every time we visit an organisation, there are numerous examples which we now capture on how that is happening. And as they say, we can't plan or scale up without unrestricted. That's what funders want organisations to do, really. But, you know, that they can't do that without this unrestricted funding. So the second value, these are things that were sort of, I suppose, in a way, softer responses, but actually they've said make as much difference to them. So our way of giving unrestricted, and especially in terms of in-person as well, this is all what our funded partners have said to us. Leaders said it really does boost confidence. They talk about being respectful and honest. And in terms of equity, they say how empowering it is to be trusted and listened to, particularly when a trustee joins us as a visitor already as well. I mean, what happens is, I mean, what this happens is it leads to, they've said, huge motivation. And it's not just the leaders who can find that space quite lonely, but also the board or volunteers and other staff. I think we all know that unrestricted funding must save time for fundraising, but also Pauline from the Southwark Day Centre for Asylum Seekers, pictured here, really explained quite graphically how much extra bookkeeping time restricted funding takes. I mean, a lot of the organisations we support still have around 15 one-off funders they're managing that all require different types of monitoring. We've also been told that it can serve as a catalyst for other funding, which is not something we thought of before we went into this. So the third value, which is sort of the place we've landed on, again, this is as a small funder being very realistic about other things that we can't hope to monitor. What we've found is that this type of unrestricted funding creates a really, really rich space to learn how to be a better funder. And these are just some examples of, by going into the meetings with our overarching learning question about how we can be a better funder, we capture all sorts of things which we see as quick wins, as well as other things we need to talk to others about. I mean, this is very, very, very practical things. We now proactively offer references, and this can be at the last minute. This is the Westminster House Youth Club, who are actually one of our former partners, but asked us to write a reference at the last minute because someone had pulled out. As a result, they've got a grant, not just obviously of us, but that is really rewarding to hear. And we've done that with half our partners now. We now link multi-year grants to CPI. This is in response to one of our learning questions, which is how organisations are responding to the cost of living crisis. So also we looked back and realised we hadn't done that with our round one partners, and so we awarded that retrospectively as well. Trustees now join our visits where at all possible, because we've seen the impact it has on the charity leaders of meeting someone who is sort of holding that power as part of trying to address the imbalance. And also we now try where possible to share our catch-up visits with other local funders. This saves time for them, as well as making new introductions. And recently, I mean, we invited young people from one of our funded partners, Juvenis. It was part of their youth mentoring scheme to broaden horizons. And Winston Good, the CEO, we suddenly realized this was an opportunity. So they joined the board for lunch, which was certainly for the highlight for our board, but also we gather has had a very positive impact on the young people. There are many things that we've learned about that we can't action straight away, but we are looking, for example, capacity building, huge need, and addressing the hostile funding environment in Lambeth and Southwark. But we do work closely and proportionately with other partners, and we're addressing this now more strategically as a board. So how do we look at impact? And this is all proportionate. As a, you know, we have a very busy board, everyone works full time, and I work 4 days a week, and sort of what matters most. Firstly, what we did last year was put what we call the internal scaffolding in place with this new framework. We have been doing unrestricted for 3 years, but we're struggling a lot with how we were capturing this. We could see on the ground the difference it was making, but didn't know how to share it, and also felt very defensive all the time. People were asking us, how do you know you're making a difference? What if there's a problem? And we didn't feel confident enough about giving those answers. So we worked with IVAR 18 months ago on a learning review, very proportionate learning review, and came up with this framework, which has been really quite transformational for us. I've blogged quite a lot on all of the detail and all of the questions, and that's on our website. So I'll just give an overview now. So there are 4 elements. Firstly, we have a series of organisational learning questions. The overall one is, how can we be the best funder possible? And underneath that, we have a series of other ones that we hold, well, the board holds and I hold as we go into our funding. We have a much more consistent approach to visiting partners now and capturing data. We're now much more confident about what constitutes data in the broader sense and how we can capture that. We worked a lot on our renewals and becoming more transparent. We realised that that renewal meeting was the elephant in the room. However trusting we'd been during the year, we had to recognise that for the funded partner, that meeting that triggers a renewal grant feels very different, and we all needed to be honest about that. So we've talked as a board a lot about what's proportionate compliance in order to ensure that the charities are delivering their mission, and so we are delivering ours. But that's something we work on all the time, but has worked well so far. And what we do, well, I probably do it 2 or 3 times a year. I pull all this information, I sort of throw it into a matrix as we go through the year, and then produce thematic reports that are absolutely put at the heart of our board decisions and strategies. So very briefly, the 2 things that matter most to us is, is trust developing on both sides? And if not, why not? And are we learning how to be a better funder and doing something with that learning? Now I'm going to pass back to Ben. I hope that's not gone over. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rachel. And in the interest of time and the pairs approach for people who are interested is set out in the report. So I'm just going to read a couple of sentences from that about because it picks up on what Rachel's just described, and then we'll go into the Q&A. So please, we've already got a couple of good questions in there. Please keep posting. So the pairs approach reflects the family's commitment, and if you like, for other foundations, that is reflecting the the strategy is to support organizations to do what they do well by building a real relationship that is forged over time around issues of mutual interest. So they are largely untroubled, as they would say, by questions of empirical impact measurement. They see social action as a complex and collaborative endeavor. We've heard that, echoes of that in Louise and Rachel. So the Pairs is not looking to claim impact for itself, and it actually is unconvinced of the value of many efforts to do so. We recognize that our money goes into a bigger pot, they say. However large our philanthropic input, it is often dwarfed by the scale of the issues, so we can't reasonably claim impact. So impact is a journey, not a destination. And the top priority for pairs, similar actually to what Rachel's just described, is not written reports, but is relationships, open dialogue about context, challenges, and opportunities that can help both the funded partner and pairs itself to be the best that they can be, but recognizing the limitations as the funder of what control you can exert over the field you're contributing to. So let's ask you, Rachel and Louise, to come back with your cameras on, and we have got some questions. Please keep them coming. I have some myself. Thank you, Kieran, for the shout out about not being a regulator. I think it is so important to emphasize this point that, you know, as charities, we have got our own auditors. We don't need another one. And we are accounting to the Charity Commission for Public Benefit and having our accounts audited. So the duplication of that effort is something that we want to be trying to avoid. There's a question here from Ro Howell. I'm sorry if I've got your first name wrong there, which I think actually is coming up in a lot of conversations about open and trusting grant making, is how we support funded organizations to really believe in the integrity of your different approach when we've been fed a diet often of restricted project funding with tight outcome controls. So any reflections from either of you on the journey that you've had to go on with funded partners to move into this new model? Louise, can I come to you and then Rachel?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I guess it's a little bit to what I talked about in my presentation, which is the sessions that we've held with our partners for the Future Communities Fund, the first strategic fund that we launched. So 13 organisations delivering around, you know, working with diverse groups of young people, supporting them into positions of power, leadership and governance, and taking the time working with an organisation like IVAR to really sit with those organisations and build the trust and work out what they want to get out of this experience of being in, you know, a funding relationship with us for 5 years. Is quite a long time. So, you know, we couldn't go in and impose what we wanted over those 5 years. That wouldn't be a particularly fulfilling experience, I think, on either side of the table. So I think it's that kind of dialogue and encouragement of sharing what the concerns are. And one of the learning sessions that we held was very much that kind of open discussion to say, what are you concerned about? Is it about things like capacity? And some of these are quite small scale organizations, so practical things like paying for the organizations to be able to join us at a session for their travel, for their overnight accommodation, and removing any sort of practical barriers. And I think for us that has been the really sort of major point, is just engaging in conversations about actually how do you overcome some of those practical challenges around mindset or around practicalities. And that has generated some really meaningful conversations, so that the approach is driven by and very much part and parcel of the work that the organisations are doing.
There's something really interesting for me about how it's a kind of layered approach. It's not just about publishing new guidelines on a website and saying and making a shift, because we had a session this morning about reporting, and one of the funders was sharing that they are totally fine about receiving annual reports, and a huge number of people are still sending in bespoke reports. Because I think there's a sense that that is secretly what is expected of us. So
yeah,
you have to put effort in, is what you're saying. Sorry, Louise, you want to
Yeah, I mean, you do, and I mean, I think there are still ongoing conversations. So I suppose in my mind, I'm separating this out into two sort of channels. One is the learning and support contract that we have with IVAR directly supporting the organisations, and we are part of those conversations. And then there is the what I would call progress reporting, what other funders might call monitoring. Personally, I hate that word, but and that is more about the kind of softer stuff of how are the organizations doing more generally. And I think what we have struggled to do is come to a clear understanding of, we don't want a really lengthy progress reporting form that we send out and everyone opens and goes, oh, flipping heck. But equally, some of these organizations, being quite small scale, don't really know where to start in telling us about what they've been up to. So it's giving sort of broad categories, headings that they can, write as much or as little as they want to, and having a conversation about actually how they're doing. So it is that kind of continuing that relational model that we use.
But guidance is important. I think we've seen that actually the blank piece of paper can be quite terrifying. So really interesting. Rachel, reflections on, because of course you went on quite a journey in terms of the funding model and what it's taken for funded partners to really engage on the terms that you were hoping they would.
I mean, we do, I think, like one of the case studies in your report, we put most of our effort into the shortlisting at the beginning. So getting to know, as part of the shortlisting process, we explain what unrestricted giving is at that stage, answer questions and start that trust. But as Louise says, it takes time. So in the early stages, most of the partners we were visiting still were very nervous and keep on saying, is it okay? Is it okay? And so in a way, it's practicing what we preach. So at those catch-up visits, genuinely say, you don't need to produce a report. This is going to be a conversation. Before then, we would email them and say, look, we'll want to talk through your highlights and your challenges, but don't prepare anything. We just want to listen. And genuinely, when you get to that meeting, just to listen, I take notes, I write it up afterwards, I share that with them. And then they begin to realize that when I come even with a trustee, they don't have to prepare anything, and it just takes time. But we're always learning, because we went to one funder and they honestly said we were nervous about applying for unrestricted funding because we assumed we would have to give much more monitoring. So you're learning all the time. So it's just having those conversations and building that trust and reassuring them all the time that they can put it into their reserves. We don't have restrictions, and then gradually their confidence, we see it build.
Thank you. We've got a lot of questions here. I'm going to try and get through some of them. One of them is about pairs. I mean, I think if Amy were here, she'd be saying, we're not interested in contributing to change. We just don't necessarily buy into the framework approach. But you talked, Louise, a really nice phrase, I think, that a partner success is a strategic success. It's that alignment between the objectives of a funded organization and your mission. Other people have talked to us about the idea of interdependence. It seems to me that is a very important thing to agree, almost philosophically as well as strategically, upstream, because it allows you to flow in this direction. We've got some interesting questions here. One is about, is it best suited to smaller grassroots organizations? I wonder if you've got any reflections on where you feel unrestricted funding can be most useful or powerful. And then we'll come on to, I think, an interesting thing about from someone about, to what extent are charities as expert in thinking about impact as this model might be predicated on. But can we deal with the kind of, where do we feel unrestricted funding can be of most value? Any thoughts on that, either of you?
I mean, we only support charities that are under 300,000, but within that there's quite a difference. And actually, one of our learning questions is, what is the impact of our grant if we stop? And having captured sort of learning from these organizations, it's been quite salutary, because even those organisations that are really becoming more robust, that you might think they're attracting other funding, their income's gone soaring up, they still demonstrate how rare it is to get unrestricted funding and the difference it makes, even if their income's gone up to £600,000. So I think, I mean, I know most about small organisations, but the larger ones are saying how rare and how important it is for all the reasons we've shared already.
Louise, do you want to come in on that, or should we go on to another?
I mean, there's not much that I could add. Similarly, our experiences at the under 250,000 turnover, I guess the challenge that you have as a reasonably small scale funder is how you can really add value to a larger scale organization, because it does become a drop in the ocean. And I think even with a learning partner, it becomes much more challenging to identify actually what the impact has been. So certainly that's our preference, is to stick with smaller scale organizations.
So we got an interesting question. I mean, it's a provocation with a small p, from Simon Cook. Don't know if either of you can see that, but although sometimes charities are experts in their area of work, many lack the understanding of how to create meaningful long-term change. I think we sometimes overemphasize their expertise and impact and have a desire to redress power imbalances with funders. So it's the kind of unintended consequences of this movement that actually, where the funder retreats, it's over to the charity. And actually there's an assumption built in there that, of course, that we can think creatively and imaginatively and thoroughly about our contribution to change. Now, we know some funders would think about that very seriously. And so the whole area of Funder Plus and additionality to help strengthen organizations realize their mission is one option, is one approach. So I wonder if you've got any reflections on that, about not just assuming that charities can step up and that might need support in thinking through about how to achieve greater impact.
I mean, I think this is where the framing of a learning and support contract comes in. So it's partly about working with organisations to gather learning from the experiences that they have from delivering, but it's also about providing support and having conversations about actually what are the challenges that organisations are facing, what are others doing well that they can share in terms of measuring impact in similar circumstances, or even in very different circumstances, and providing tools and support where they're needed. So I think our approach is about being supporting and strengthening to organisations. And if that means identifying other areas of support that organisations might need in, you know, demonstrating their own impact, then I think that is very much within the remit of a learning and support contract. And it's a very important part of it.
Yeah, I mean, I'd echo what Louise said. At a small scale, as trust has developed, organisations have shared what are real concerns, and you can see the organisation is experiencing problems that it can't easily resolve, and it's what you do with that information. And I mean, we're learning all the time. This particular group of partners are probably less developed than others, but what we are now doing is, for example, capturing that and talking to other local funders to see what support might be able to be put in place, or what different timelines we might put on our funding. So we do recognise that, but the trusting environment means that they share what those problems are, so we can work together to do something about it. Not
And
necessarily
certainly,
us, but
sorry,
no,
Rachel.
yeah, not necessarily us. We're tiny.
Yes, quite.
You know, other partners or deliverers or funders.
And thinking of yourself as operating in an ecosystem, I think, has been particularly important for you as a place-based funder. We've got some other questions about that in the report. I direct you to the Lloyds and the Pairs approaches, both of which are really trying to hardwire support for adaptation into that, to pick up Simon's point. We've just got some very interesting questions coming through here. I want to just try and take two of them. I guess the comment around dissemination and promotion of some of these questions, absolutely, this is a massive priority for us as an organisation to continue. We share this with colleagues in the US, and we will push it as far and wide as we can. So rest assured on that front. I want to go to an interesting question from Alex at Lloyd's. How do you think charities are adapting to having both this new type of learning relationship that presumably exists alongside more traditional accountability monitoring demands from other funders? So whilst you might have the joy of a Peter Minute or co-op grant, you've also got over here 5 funders wanting bespoke reports. How are we, what are we seeing about that? Rachel.
I mean, this is really challenging. I went to the London Funders Festival finale and heard Bayo Adelaja from Do It Now talking about this, and it's such valuable learning. I mean, she made us really think, because she said, really, as you fund an organization, you must look at what support might be able to be put in place, because otherwise, if you leave a funder, an organization in a worse position than it started, you're doing huge damage. And the importance of not walking away and recognizing that one of our roles is to help prepare for a hostile funding environment. I mean, I don't know what we do with that at the moment, but I think it's picked up on what Louise has said and us looking at other providers. But I think we have to recognize it remains a hostile funding environment, and to do what we can with other similar funders to address that.
I think to be honest, I mean, part of the challenge is, the reason that we're here today talking to other funders and trying to influence other funders, because, let's make no bones about it, that is why we are here, because we see this as a powerful change in how funders deliver grant making. There are practical things that we can do in terms of, I mentioned accepting other formats for progress reporting from other funders. So if you're already producing a report that covers some of the things that we would like to see, then just share that report with us. We're not asking for something that is tailored to our needs. So I think there are practical, tangible things that we can do. There are big picture things that we can do, which are about influencing how other funders operate. But, as you say, there are challenges there that maybe we can work through with some of the organisations as we see them. So where we've got the learning and support contract, if we're having a conversation about challenges, because we've funded the whole organisation, it may be that those challenges actually are about how difficult it is to service some of the other funders. I don't know. We haven't had those conversations yet, but I guess throughout the course of a 5-year relationship, we will start to have them. I don't know how we would address those, but we're certainly going to be having many of those conversations, I guess, as we go through those relationships. And I hope that we can do something to support organisations.
Thank you. Look, we've got a minute to go, and I just want to give you both 20 seconds to, given picking up on Louise's point and this journey we're on of trying to reshape the field, a message, if you were speaking to a skeptical trustee of a foundation contemplating the shift to unrestricted funding, one message to help them get over the line and fully embrace this model. Who'd like to go first?
Well,
Rachel.
I guess it's sort of,
Sure.
why do you feel you know more than who you're funding?
Louise.
Yeah, organisations who are working in communities to deliver the work, they are the experts. Trust them, let them get on with it, get out of the way. And in terms of the piece on trustees, probably the most important thing that we did was we, let's say, borrowed quite a lot of the content from IVAR's research on unrestricted funding and used that as a board report, as the leaping off point. There are, lots of incredible insights out there to help influence boards of trustees. And it can be an effective conversation, but you have to begin somewhere. So a trustee conversation is a very good place to start.
Amazing. Look, thank you both so much. It's by doing this and making your thinking visible that we can try and help build confidence about trying things differently. I'm sorry we haven't answered some of the questions. I hope that's not because I just couldn't quite understand them, or was a bit overwhelmed by them. Do send in questions to Ivar and we'll pass them on if Louise and Rachel have got thoughts, or we'll try and answer them ourselves. Access our resources. We'll send out the slides. We'll send out the recording. Have good days and keep the faith, and we can all go further, and let's try and do that. Thank you all. Have a good
Thanks,
day.
everyone. Bye.
Bye bye, everyone.